Bill 4125 authorizes counties and municipalities to create a tenant legal services office to provide legal assistance to low-income and disabled residents facing eviction or requesting reasonable accommodations. Around 60% of all reported housing complaints are disability-related. Currently, low-income individuals and persons with disabilities have little access to legal services when they face eviction or are requesting reasonable housing accommodation. In eviction proceedings, this disadvantage often results in homelessness, loss of employment, and harm to children and families. Providing legal services for low-income individuals and persons with disabilities helps these individuals access fair housing. One report states that among those who are not represented, the number of tenants evicted is 78%, but only 5% of tenants with attorneys are actually evicted. Legal representation for these individuals also improves local economies. A new report from Philadelphia shows that by investing less than $4 million in representation for low-income tenants facing eviction, the city could save $45.2 million annually by drastically reducing the number of disruptive evictions.
Members, any questions? All right, I'll give you the right to close. Chair would like to call up John Woodley. If you could state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill, please, sir.
I'm John Woodley. I'm an advocate for disability access, and I'm for the bill. I would like to tell you a story that concerns my...
One second, sir. We got a committee substitute. Representative Anderson lays out the committee substitute to House Bill 4125. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we have a city committee substitute. I would like to tell you a story about my elderly disabled mother who needed an accommodation to relocate. Started off at the property she was at with the tax credit property, and she needed a living caretaker. And the property management denied her request for a living caretaker. They also denied her request to be relocated to another property to be relocated to another accessible property. And she's on Medicare and Medicaid, and being on Medicaid, all your assets, you're less than $2,000, so she can't even afford to relocate herself. And when we were she was forced to sign a notice to vacate under duress. And as a result of signing the notice to vacate, they said that she had to be out. I tried to get them to extend her notice on a month-to-month to give her additional time to leave, and they refused that as well because it takes additional time for somebody who needs a first floor accessible unit to find someplace else. And they refused all of her accommodation. And they got an eviction attorney to respond to the email concerning the accommodations, and they refused them all. When I was seeking property, a place for her to stay at other properties, a lot of them also were refusing her reasonable accommodation to locate onto a property. One example is they refused to change the pet policies for service support animals. Another one was she has a housing voucher based on her disability. She's an elderly disabled person that cannot work. She is on disability income because of her disability. So that makes her indigent. And in order to qualify for fair housing, she has the housing choice voucher, and what that does is it allows her to meet the requirements of her portion of the rent is less than 3 times her income. So that's how a housing voucher gets tied into a disability, and the property would refuse those accommodations as well. Some of the properties, we have to look at properties that were built after 2001, because a lot of them built before that only had 2 feet wide doorways where you can't get a wheelchair through. So the common use areas or the unit were not accessible. So that was some of the barriers that we were going through to try to get into housing. So we also went to the tenant council, the caseworkers, they're not attorneys, they don't have any enforcement capability. The housing authorities also don't get involved in tenant landlord issues, and they don't have enforcement capability. We get referred to legal aid. Legal aid, she meets the requirement to get legal aid, but then they don't file HUD complaint, and the only legal advice they gave her was that she could lose her voucher if she go to get evicted. And they did not help at all with trying to put a stop to the eviction or working out a resolution at the property she had to relocate from to the property she had to relocate to. So overall, when somebody becomes evicted, there's a lot of things that happen. One, when they get evicted, an eviction stays on the record for 7 years, and it makes it almost impossible to get back into housing. If they were employed, they could lose their job because it makes it hard for them to maintain employment. If they have kids, their kids tend to get moved around from district to district in different schools, so that or they become dropouts. If you're a student that went through an eviction in college, they may have to drop out too. And then we have a lot of resources in the counties and stuff, and local municipalities that have to pay money in to help support somebody going through these processes. So the whole point of this bill is to stop preventable eviction from happening in the first place, to help stop homelessness, put a stop to homelessness.
Gotcha.
So,
all right.
If you have any questions.
Members, any questions for our witness?
No, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Sir, thank you for sharing your story and
It was
experience.
nice, yes.
Chair calls up Trish McAllister. Hello, ma'am. If you could state your name, who you're with, and your position on the bill, please.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Chair and committee members, for giving me some time to talk with you today. My name is Trish McAllister. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Access to Justice Commission, which was created by the Texas Supreme Court in 2001 to increase access to the justice system for those who cannot afford attorney, civil justice system to be specific. I'm testifying on the bill, both personally as well as for the commission. I want to begin by giving you some basic statistics about eviction in Texas. In Houston and San Antonio had the 3rd and 5th highest number of evictions in the country in 2016, which is the most recent aggregate data that we have available. Meanwhile, Killeen has the 12th highest rate of eviction in the whole nation, with about 6 evictions every day, which is impressive for the size of Killeen. Obviously, there's larger numbers in larger cities, but the 6 means it could be an individual, and it could also be a family, so higher numbers of actual people. 9 of the 100 cities with the highest total numbers of eviction in the nation are in Texas, including Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, Arlington, Killeen, Corpus Christi, Austin, and Irving. The stats are of special significance because evictions have a ripple effect on communities and the people who are evicted and their families. As was mentioned, eviction is the leading cause of homelessness. It also affects a person's employment. A recent Harvard study suggested that the likelihood of being laid off to be 11 to 22% percentage points higher for workers who experience an eviction or other involuntary move compared to workers who don't. It also
I
affects
have
the
a question
education.
for you,
Yes,
real
sir.
quick. Is this information and these statistics something you could provide to the committee?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And just let me know which. I'm going to reference a lot of studies, so just let me know which ones that you would like me
Well,
to.
in the interest of time, rather than reading off the specifics, if we could get that in writing so we can reference it when we're looking over the bill
Okay.
and focus on your, individual testimony, that would be helpful.
Okay, absolutely. Well, most of my testimony is referencing.
Well, you say whatever you want.
Okay.
I'm just.
Okay.
It's,
All right. Well,
a lot of us are tired, and I want to be
I
able
totally
to digest
understand.
it. So if I have it in person, I think it'd be more beneficial. But you tell the testimony.
Absolutely. I'll just give an overview, and then I'll make sure to get the information to
That would
all
be
of you.
wonderful.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It affects the education of their children. The National Assessment of Education Progress analyzes the educational outcomes of children who frequently change schools, and reported that students who change schools more than twice in the preceding 18 months are half as likely to be proficient in reading as their stable peers. Mobility was found to have a negative impact on achievement test scores, which increases with each subsequent move. Besides avoiding negative consequences I just mentioned, there's also data to show that that access to counsel makes a real difference in communities and the courts themselves. The number of people who retain housing increases, as has also been mentioned. Researchers conducted a study in the New York City Housing Court where tenants were randomly selected to receive an attorney assistance or be told that no attorney was available to help them. Both groups of tenants were followed to the conclusion of their case. The randomized trial found that tenants who were represented by attorneys were 4.4 times more likely to retain possession of their apartments than similar tenants who didn't have an attorney. Over a 4-year period from 2014 to 2017, an estimated 70,000 New York City tenants retained possession of their homes. And I have to tell you, just as a person who works in the poverty field, and I have for 20-something years, retaining housing is the number one indicator of poverty. So in other words, if you can make sure that somebody stays housed, they are much more likely to be able to raise themselves out of poverty than if they are not able to maintain stable housing. An appearance from an attorney for either party has been shown to increase settlement rates from 7% when neither party was represented to 26% when the defendant was represented to 38% when the plaintiff was represented. In New York, the New York City Office of Civil Justice in 2017 reported that residential evictions decreased approximately from 27% over the last 4 years since this program there has been implemented and decreased 5% from 2016 to 2017. Courts also save time because they're working with lawyers rather than pro se litigants. And cases are much more likely to settle out of court. So I know, it sounds sometimes like it's nuts to be spending money to save money, but it is true that this Philadelphia study that has come out, and there's been several other ones, but this is the most recent one, has found that there's over a $12 return on investment when tenants are represented in eviction hearings, low-income tenants represented in eviction hearings. I conclude
You said
by
how much to
testimony.
one?
It's $12.74 return on investment.
So we need to invest about $1 billion to get Dan Huberty all his money for public education. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you so much. Members, any questions for our
Absolutely.
witness? And please, if you could get that information to us,
Happy
that would be
to.
very helpful. Thank you very much.
Do that. Thank you.
Chair calls up Joey Gitzig. Did I say that right?
Yes.
If you could state your name, who you're with, and your position on the bill, please.
I can do that. Okay. I always have to test this. Okay, it works.
We got you.
My name is Joey Gitzig. I represent Texas Democrats with Disabilities, although I always say that disabilities are a nonpartisan issue, really. And I am very much for this bill, and as I always say, grateful to Representative Israel for filing it for us. So you heard the story of John's mother, and you heard these statistics. And the thing is, I've been hearing them too, because people have been contacting me, and they've been asking me to find them help. And I have a background in social work, so I figured, why not? Why not, right? It's pretty impossible, especially when you're somebody with a disability and you have different sort of access needs. But there's a big difference between what the law says you can do and what's accessible, what's possible for you, and then what the reality is. So I was like drawing out a maze, drawing out a little path. But so you request an accommodation, and then the accommodation is denied. Well, legally, they're not allowed to retaliate, and they're not allowed to evict you because you requested that accommodation. However, what actually happens, and I'm waiting on those statistics from Disability Rights Texas, but I can get them to you as soon as I get them. What actually happens is, no, it's just like with teachers and with everything else. When you try to assert your legal rights, they will retaliate. So you're going to get a notice to vacate, 3 days. And then if you do not, then they will file. Usually it takes anywhere from, I've seen 3 to 6 weeks, open to close, beginning of the case to the end of the case. And then if you don't appeal within 5 days, then they can send someone to kick you out after 24 hours. Now, the thing is, you are so overwhelmed when you have this notice to vacate. And now it's about not being able to get an accommodation, which legally, okay, this isn't supposed to happen. So here's the thing. So I wrote, yeah, right, now what, right? What are you going to do? So the law says here are your options when this happens. You can file a HUD complaint. This is what it says. Guess what? This can take up to 100 days for them to respond. And we're looking at between 4 to 6 weeks, right, from beginning to end. So that's a little bit less than 180 days, right? Or 100 days, up to 100 days. You also have an option of filing a complaint with the Texas Workforce Commission, but you call and you call and you call and you get lots of machines, and you've been waiting, and our friend over here has been waiting 6 months and nothing has happened. So that's still a little bit more than the 4 to 6 weeks that you could be on the street, right? So then the third option is you can hire a lawyer. Well, that comes with a really expensive retainer, which you have no way in. There's just no way you can. I was looking for a word. There's just no way that you can afford that. I believe our friend, $3,000 retainer. $3,000 retainer. So these are your options. Up to 100 days. Been waiting 6 months, no response. And then hiring a lawyer, which you can't afford. So now, what are your options? Well, now your options are, well, you could become homeless and live on the street. But then, your other option is you could move in with friends and family, but that doesn't mean it's accessible. So you still have that issue. Then there's always the number one option that our state has for people in these situations, which is jail. It's a big time houser. And that is why it should not surprise any of you that the numbers of people with disabilities who are incarcerated is 4 times greater than the number of people with disabilities in the general population because of things like this. So what's awesome about this plan, and you'll notice it, I can't remember the exact part, but it's about they offer somebody who will help you with disability housing issues, right? So when you're having an issue, you can contact this tenant office, right? And they will give you somebody who can help work with that landlord or that property management company on that issue, because your options right now are the streets or a homeless shelter, but if you have a family, good luck. there are no options, and that's why we're here. I'm wearing this shirt, which normally I wouldn't wear. It says ATX Hack for Change, because I attempted to address this issue at a hackathon last summer, and we created a predictive heat map based off of what they're doing in New York and also San Francisco. And all of this can be used together, but the point is we have to do something to keep people housed. It really does save the state so much money and reduce trauma. It's a really big deal.
All right.
So decarceration, saving money, everyone should love it. We really hope that when you all meet with statistics and everything, you will eventually pass it out and send it to calendars so we can actually get some help.
Members,
So thank
any
you.
questions for the witness? Thank you so much for your time. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on for or against House Bill 4125? Hearing none. Representative to close.
Close.
All right. Chair withdraws committee substitute. Chair leaves House Bill 4125 pending before the committee.